Hi, my name is Beth, and welcome to my January reading journal wrap-up. I'm so excited to finally kick off the new year with my first reading wrap-up of 2025. I want to address the elephant in the room that is this video's release date. My January was so incredibly busy. I originally thought that this semester was going to be a little bit easier for me, but it's turning out to be quite the opposite. So I haven't had the most time to film or prepare videos in a timely manner, and I apologize for that. So I just decided to combine January and February together. It kind of worked out okay in the end though, because I didn't read very much in February. I think that if I had made two separate videos, February's video would have been really short and probably really boring. So maybe this is for the best. But I'm starting off by creating a monthly cover page for January. I use my cover pages as dividers in my reading journal. I find that I'm really good at remembering which month I read something in, and it works to break up all the review spreads. I wasn't a huge fan of my cover pages last year, which were all pretty simple in design, so I wanted to change things up this year. The first thing I knew I wanted to change was to add stickers back to these pages. The spreads just felt a little empty and boring, but I think stickers will make the spreads a lot more exciting. I decided to purchase 12 sticker sheets from an Etsy seller called Artimation Co. that I'll be using every month for my cover pages. One thing I'm not changing is my monthly quote. I love having a monthly quote in my journal because I like seeing the lines that stood out to me at the time. The quote that I'm using for January is from Us Against You by Frederick Bachman, which I read in December last year. The quote I've chosen is, "I hope you're the kind of person who gets a happy ending," which feels weird to have at the beginning of a journal, but it is what it is. In previous years, I've cut out each word and glued them all individually onto the page. This was really time-consuming and frustrating because sometimes I would cut everything out only to find out that I wrote the quote too big and I'd have to write it all out again, but smaller. I want to avoid that issue moving forward, so I've decided to simply write out the quote on a piece of paper and glue that piece in. This way, I get the quote and it doesn't take nearly as much time. Another thing I didn't love about my cover pages last year was that they didn't feature any information on the books that I read that month. Yes, I had all the info in my table of contents, but I was missing it on the monthly pages. So I've brought back labels for the right-hand side of the page. I have a few different options for the labels that I'll be using, but this month I'm using these place cards that I found at Michael's. They're meant for wedding tables, but I thought they were the perfect size for a label. So I'm cutting them in half and using them to identify the different books I read this month. In hindsight, I wish I'd used the paper that I used for the quote because the labels really stick out, but we live with our choices. Also, I am not a very good collager, so this is something I hope to work on as the year goes on. I read 5 books in January, but I'll only be talking about 4 of them. One was a pedagogy self-help type book for one of my classes, and honestly, I don't really have too much to say about it. But I am setting up spreads for the other 4. 3 of them were books I read for school, and honestly, they aren't the most exciting selection of titles, but hopefully you enjoy the spreads or find interest in a couple of the books. But with all of that out of the way, we can finally get started on the book review spreads. The first book I read in January was The Tempest by William Shakespeare. It has been a very hot minute since I've read a Shakespearean play, and it's been even longer since I read one of his comedies. The last time I read a Shakespearean play was a few years ago when I was reading If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I wanted a bit more context on Julius Caesar, but I haven't read one of his comedies since I was in grade 9, which was 11 years ago. Ugh. Holy shit, I'm old. Okay. The Tempest follows a magician and former duke named Prospero, who causes a huge sea storm to occur, crashing a nearby ship and causing all of its passengers to become stranded on Prospero's island. The group of passengers on board include Prospero's brother Antonio, who usurped his throne, and other fellow royals and royal servants. As the group is divided across the island, numerous plots to obtain power are enacted. Lower status characters rise to power, and high status individuals become targets of assassination attempts. All confined to a small island, the characters learn what it means to have power and what it means to learn forgiveness. This play is packed with a bunch of strange characters, and honestly, I didn't love most of them. I really did not like Prospero. He is an overbearing ruler of this island. He has numerous servants whom he has forced to work for him, and he doesn't care about their autonomy. He definitely represents a colonizer figure, which really rubs me the wrong way. Also, Prospero's daughter, Miranda, falls in love with a prince called Ferdinand, who was on board the ship. They have the quickest insta-love moment I have ever read in my entire life. I understand that she hasn't seen many people before, but it was instantaneous. I think the only character that I cared about was Sebastian, a prince from another kingdom. He was kind of goofy and was very easily persuaded into killing his own brother so he could become king. I may have also liked him a little bit more because I decided to give him a Scottish accent in my head while I was reading him, but I understand that that's more of a me thing. It just sort of felt like he was there for the ride, and I love that for him. In high school, I remember Shakespeare being really challenging to read, but I didn't find this one to be too bad. Maybe it's because I have more experience reading and analyzing texts, but I found this play to be easy to follow and character intentions to be clear. I did, however, find the story to be a bit anticlimactic. I'm more familiar with Shakespeare's tragedies, so the ending in particular wasn't all that exciting for me. Everything wraps up in a perfect little bow, and no one is punished for any wrongdoings. Maybe I'm a bit of a pessimist, but it was a little too cookie cutter for me. I used a mermaid sticker sheet from Rabbit Draw on Etsy to decorate this page. It felt fitting to use water-themed stationery for a book about a shipwreck. I also used some washi tape from Notebook Therapy's Gentle Giant collection and from Ikigai Papier. Even though I didn't hate this, I don't think I'll be reading many more Shakespearean plays in my future. I gave The Tempest 3 stars. It was fine, but it was a little bit boring. The next book I read was Run Towards the Danger by Sarah Polley. This was the only book I read this month that was of my own choosing. Last semester, we sampled one of the essays in this collection in my memoir class, and I really enjoyed it. So I decided to pick up the book and read the rest of the essays. Sarah Polley is a Canadian actor, writer, and director best known for Women Talking, Road to Avonlea, and The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. Her essay collection centers on her experiences with her body and how moments of her career and personal life intersect to create bodily memories. She unveils her life as a child actress turned director and how those experiences have left marks on her both mentally and physically. I'm really happy that I had a chance to sample this book in one of my classes because I don't think I would have read this book otherwise. I had seen one of Sarah Polley's movies before, Go, but I wouldn't have made the connection between that movie and her name. But I ended up really enjoying these essays. In December, I reread I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, and I think these two books speak to each other really well. They both emphasize the child actor experience. This book really helps identify that McCurdy's experience is not individual. While not everyone will have her level of destruction caused by young fame, it's a common enough experience that more and more people are writing about it. I made a note after rereading that book that I hoped Jeanette McCurdy would be one of the last people to have to write about this subject, but Polly's book was released after hers, emphasizing how these horror stories are not changing. It's so difficult to imagine that children are treated so poorly on entertainment sets. So many people want their children to be successful, but is it really worth it if your child leaves scarred and emotionally unwell? As much as it is challenging to discuss these topics, I appreciate that there are people willing to be vulnerable in order to break the stigma that fame automatically equals happiness. Most of Polly's essays are focused on the past. I really like this retrospective storytelling because it allows her to reflect on her past and identify where she was and wasn't at fault. I think the separation allows for a more genuine reflection. There are some things in her life that she originally took blame for that in actuality were never her fault to begin with. Being left alone at a Hollywood party as a minor was not her fault. Her mother's death was not her fault. Her desire to leave acting because of severe anxiety and trauma was not her fault. It's interesting to see how the body and mind process these events at different moments in life, and I appreciated her honesty about it. Because I do think this book leads into the idea of hope. There are moments where Polly regrets her decisions, like leaving a production of Alice Through the Looking Glass early, but she acknowledges that it's important to remember how you were feeling in the moment and to forgive yourself. I'm happy that she's in a better, safer place, and that there are signs of both accepting the past and moving forward from it. I used some bookish girl stickers from Mary Gonasuli for this spread. I also used a pink flower washi tape from her shop as well. My only real complaint with this book was that almost every essay was rooted in something bad. None of the memories were ever associated with positivity. I understand that this collection is only 6 moments from Sarah Polley's entire life, but still. Otherwise, I really enjoyed this book. I gave Run Towards the Danger 4.5 stars. If you enjoyed I'm Glad My Mom Died, I'd definitely recommend checking this one out. The third book I read was Before We Were Trans by Kit Higham. I don't read a ton of nonfiction, but when I do, I prefer to read memoirs. This book is outside of that typical norm for me, but I had to read half of it for one of my classes, and I enjoyed it enough to commit to the entire thing. This book is a recounting of trans histories from around the world. Kit Higham presents various case studies as opportunities to explore the presence of transness from a time before the term trans was being used. Something that I found particularly beneficial about this book was its efforts to promote potentiality. I didn't know much about trans history before going into this book, but Higham explains that it isn't as clear-cut as other marginalized histories are. After reading some of the stories, I realized that I likely wouldn't have categorized them as trans history had I read them outside of the context of this book. But I like how Higham invites the opportunity to view these stories with a possibility for transness. There's never an assumption that these figures were 100% trans people, but the book asks you to consider how it's possible for these people to represent current ideas of transness and how trans people and gender nonconforming people might see themselves reflected. Additionally, I found it interesting to see the intersection of trans history and other types of histories. For example, there were women who dressed as men to fight in the American Civil War. Because we don't know how this gender switch actually affected these people, it's possible that some of them felt more comfortable presenting as men. Obviously, some of those people went right back to identifying as women after the war was over, but it's possible that some of them felt a disconnect. Higham shows that histories can intersect. Trans histories and women histories, for example, can be present together and still be valid. To decorate this spread, I used a fairy forest sticker sheet from Lollipop Studios on Etsy. I also paired it with a print of a girl that I received from a paper ephemera order I made a few years ago. It was actually a design on a calendar, which is why there's a little bit of blue at the top. It originally said September, but I just cut that part off. I used an orange grid washi tape from Ikigai Papier, and the rest are from Hobby Lobby. I feel like I really learned a lot from this book. If you're interested in learning more about trans history, I would definitely check this book out. I gave Before We Were Trans 4 stars. It's written in a really accessible way that is useful for both academia and personal reading and learning. The last book I read in January was The Roaring Girl by Thomas Dekker and Thomas Middleton. I exclusively read nonfiction and plays this month, which is such a weird experience. I promise that next month I'll have a few novels on the roster, but when school tells you to read something, you gotta read it. This is my first forte into classic English plays that are not Shakespearean, and it was an interesting experience, to say the least. This play centers around a real historical figure called Mary Frith, but in this play, they're known as Moll Cutpurse. They are a controversial figure in the town because they present as gender nonconforming. Moll's presentation becomes a point of interest after a young man named Sebastian is prohibited from marrying the woman he loves. To try and get back at his father, Sebastian tells him that he's actually in love with Moll instead, immediately causing tension between father and son. And so his father, Sir Alexander, hires a hitman to try and kill Moll before his son can get married. This play was written in the early 1600s, but the way it represents gender is really interesting to me. I assumed that the play would have approached the conversation with a lot more criticism and mockery, simply based on the time period. However, most of the characters in the play are entirely accepting of Moll's presentation. Literally the only person who isn't okay with it is Sir Alexander. No one is threatened by Moll's presentation, and Moll is close friends with many of the characters regardless of status. Someone is singing in the booth next to me, and it's really distracting and really entertaining. Some characters are attracted to Moll, but it's never shown in a degrading manner. It's unclear why Sir Alexander hates Moll so much, but he seems to be the only person who's upsetty spaghetti about it. Speaking of Sir Alexander, I hated him so much. On top of disliking someone for no reason, he's a terrible father and a horrible person. He invites all his rich friends over to make fun of Sebastian, while Sebastian is literally in the room with them. He whines and connives at every little thing. And there's another character called Blackston who isn't much better. He pries on lower-class women for their money, even though he's wealthy and conventionally handsome. He doesn't need to manipulate these poor women, and yet he does so for fun. I'll be honest, there were many times I was pretty confused reading this, though. The translation I was reading from wasn't great. It was sometimes hard to understand what the characters meant when they were talking, and there was a big portion in the middle that followed some shopwomen, and I just didn't really see the value of that section. I wanted to keep this spread pretty simple to save on time, so I used some green scrapbook paper and some girl stickers from Amazon to decorate this page. I also used some hanging plant stickers from Hobby Lobby. Ultimately, this play was fun, but a little frustrating and a little confusing. I gave The Roaring Girl 3 stars. It was a fun adventure, but not one I see myself revisiting. As we move into February, I'm setting up another cover page. I mentioned while setting up my January spread that collages are not my strong suit, but I'm hoping to improve as the year goes on. In February, I decided to try and make a few improvements to my cover page collage, and I did so through the help of today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is the largest online community for creatives. Whether you're looking to improve your creative hobbies or looking to take your career to the next level, Skillshare has thousands of unique classes to help you along your journey. All of their classes are made by creatives for creatives and are led by experts in the field. If you're like me and looking for ways to improve your collaging skills, I would definitely recommend taking Betsy Mitten's class, Intro to Mini Box Collages. Create beautiful collages with easy-to-find materials. She walks you through how to create beautiful, simple, and compact collages with materials you probably have around the house. It's a great introduction into understanding layers, patterns, and colors that help your collages come to life. Something that really helped me was understanding the base paper layer. I watch a lot of creators who make collages, and many of them have expressed that explaining how to collage is complicated because it's a lot of creative instinct. But I found small tips like having a base layer helpful because I'm someone who finds the blank page intimidating. If you're interested in taking Betsy's class or any of the classes available, the first 500 people to use the link in my description box will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Thank you once again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. The quote that I'm including for February is, "My library was dukedom large enough," which is from The Tempest. There weren't very many quotes out of my January reads that really stood out to me, so I went with this one because I guess I feel similarly. I'm using a stamp from Michaels to be the labels for this month, and I made sure to match them to the quote paper this time. As I moved into the spread for my book review, I noticed some spine damage in my journal. I haven't had any binding issues in my Archer and Olive journals before, but I'll keep you updated if things get worse. I had a record low in February because I only read 2 books. And similarly to January, I won't be talking about both of them. One of the books was for school, and our class received special permission to read it because it hasn't actually been published yet. So legally, I can't talk about it, but the book is being released this month, so I'll do a recap for it at the end of March. Until then, I will be sharing the other book that I read in February, which was The Golden Raven by Nora Sakovich. This is the 5th book in the All for the Game series, and I'll be honest, it's my ultimate guilty pleasure series. These books are not the best written, but they're easy books to read and complete. So because this book is 5th in a series, I won't say too much about it, but this book picks up right where the Sunshine Court left off. Jean is slowly starting to find his place on his new Exy team, despite the continuous harassment from his old team, the Ravens. Just as he starts to find new confidence, his past creeps up and threatens to undo everything he's been working on improving. And Jeremy, the team captain, is trying to find a balance between doing right for his team and finding a sense of happiness with his own life. His family has a plan for his future, but he isn't sure if it's the plan he wants. I read this book very fast because I think I just needed something that wasn't a play or nonfiction. I was also anticipating this book's release, so it didn't take much convincing of myself to stay up late and read it. Like I said though, these aren't the greatest books in the world, but I do think the best thing they have going for them is their characters. I really like a lot of the characters in this series, maybe more than some of the ones from the original trilogy. Jean definitely has some of the biggest development in this book. In the last book, he was always aggressive and fearful, but now it's easy to see that he's become a lot more comfortable with the people around him. He's able to show and verbalize care and appreciation, and I'm happy that he's finding people he can call home. Jeremy, on the other hand, feels like he's starting to go in the opposite direction. I think his family life and physical separation from his team and his friends is starting to take a toll on him, and I feel like he's going to have a breaking moment in the last book. I decided to use a print from Sibylline Maynette as the focal piece for this spread. I've had this print sitting around for a while, but I've been putting it off because I wasn't really sure how to incorporate it into a spread. It does feel a little wrong that I didn't do anything gold or bird themed, but I did use up all of my gold stationery on a different gold bird book. But we don't have to talk about that. I'll be honest, not a whole lot actually happened in this book. There were very few plot progression moments. I can recognize where certain events will probably pay off later in the final book, but independently, there isn't too much happening. It's very character-driven, which is fine, but it does lack a plot. If it were any other book, I'd probably critique that a lot more, but I know what the expectations are with these books, and I'm willing to give it a pass here. My enjoyment level outweighs my urge to have criticism. I gave The Golden Raven 4 stars. I have some predictions for how this series will end, but we'll have to wait and see. And that is it for my January and February wrap-up. Again, I'm sorry that this is coming out so late. Things have just been incredibly busy for me lately. I promise that March's video will not take as long to come out, so look out for that one next month. I know that this probably wasn't the most exciting wrap-up, but I'm in the middle of a few interesting books that I'm looking forward to sharing in the near future. But until then, thank you very much for watching. Have a great rest of your day.